Hi, everyone. Welcome to the United States Heartland China Association's second event in our author series. Today, we are going to be discussing the novel China Through American Eyes, Early Depictions of the Chinese People and Culture in U.S. Print Media. We are very excited today to be joined by the author of the novel, Professor Wenxian Zhang of Rollins College. We are also very excited to be joined today by Dr. Xin Huang of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, who will be moderating the event today. My name is Jason Conley. I'm from the United States Heartland China Association, where we believe not all bridges are built of concrete and steel. And sometimes bridges are built from Zoom. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're very excited to have so many participants. A little bit more about USHCA. If it's your first time joining us, we are a bipartisan, grassroots 501c3 nonprofit. Due to our fantastic audience, we get to promote and host events like this. So if this is your first time, welcome, and we encourage you to keep coming. A few housekeeping items before we start tonight. If at any time during the webinar you have a question, please feel free to drop your question in the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen. And then at the end of the webinar, we also encourage you to just spend 60 seconds, fill out a survey for us so we know how to better serve you in the future. With that, I will turn it over to United States Heartland China Association Chairman and CEO, Governor Bob Holden. Governor Holden.
Thank you, Jason, and welcome everybody that's participating this evening. You're in for a delightful evening of learning and expanding and growing. As I was telling some of the people earlier, I got interested in China as governor of Missouri, and I traveled to China and met the people there, decided to open an office in China. This is about building relationships and building relationships around the world. So I look forward to the authors we have speaking tonight, and let's make this the beginning of a great future for all of us. Jason, let me turn it back to you, and looking forward to it. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Governor Holden. I'm very excited for tonight's event. I'm personally a really big fan of this book. Not only is it visually striking, but the way in which it presents history is incredibly relevant today. Unfortunately, in 2021, there's been a very not needed spike in anti-Asian violence. And I think that this book and our discussion on it is very timely because it really accurately depicts kind of the cultural institutions that founded America and that still exist today. So I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Xin Huang. Dr. Huang, thank you so much for being here today. And Dr. Huang, I think you just need to open your microphone really quick.
Thank you, Jason, and thank the U.S. Heartland China Association for hosting this wonderful event. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Wenxian Zhang, who has been a member of Rollins College faculty since 1995. He's a recipient of the Cornell Distinguished Faculty Service Award, Arthur Viking Davis Fellow, a member of the Asian Studies program, and a full professor in the College of Liberal Arts in Winter Park, Florida, USA. Professor Zhang's recent academic books related to China include Huawei Goes Global, Made in China for the World, Huawei Goes Global, Regional Geopolitical Perspectives and Crisis Management. Excuse me. China's Belt and Road Initiative, Changing the Rule of Globalization. China Visualized by Americans, 1840 to 1911. The entrepreneurial and the business elites of China, the Chinese returnees who have shaped modern China. A guide to top 100 companies in China. Excuse me. And the biographic dictionary of new Chinese entrepreneur and business leaders. Professor Zhang is also a recipient of a Dorsey Dodd Outstanding Archivist Award and the Patrick D. Smith Award for the Florida Historical Society. The Award of Excellence from the Society of Florida Archivists and the Community Service Award from the Greater Orlando Chinese Professionals Association. His 1918 book, China Through American Eyes, Early Depictions of the Chinese People and Culture in the US Print Media, which he will present to us today, has received the Jinliao Award for the best research from the Chinese American Librarians Association in 2019. So please join me to welcome Dr. Zhang to give us this wonderful talk.
Thank you so much. It's my great pleasure. Let me first share my PowerPoint. So I hope you will be able to see it. Thank you, Jason and Wenxian, for your nice introduction, and thank Fanmi and U.S. Heartland China Association and Governor Holden. It's such a pleasure. It's my great honor to share my research experience with this community, that how the Chinese people and the culture are portrayed in the early U.S. print media. So my goal is from a historical perspective, I would like to provide a visual documentation of Americans' perception of the Chinese people and culture, explore and examine the dynamics of American and Chinese cultural exchange since the mid-19th century, and help general public to develop broad comprehension of the historical era and events, and hopefully the ultimate goal is to contribute to a better understanding between American and Chinese people here. As Governor Holden and Jason said, that we are building relationship and bridging the cultures. So my collections focus largely on engravings, lithographic prints, cartoons, sketches, and illustrations. They mostly come from newspapers, magazines, books, brochures, political, commercial advertisements, postcards. But I had to make a claim: this is not an exclusive collection, but a selection of various historical images. The time frame I'm focused on is from 1840 to 1911, the founding of the Republic of China, the collapse of the Qing dynasty, and also that the Golden Rush, that's when the Chinese began a large-scale interaction, migration to the United States. So that's a very significant, very important historical period in modern Chinese history, but also it's the peak era for the illustrated news report in the U.S. History of journalism. That's a major source of my the collection of images I select. So all the images I include in the book, they are published during that time period, and also the book is largely arranged in 2 parts and 5 chapters. So the first image I want to share with you is this one by Hamlet Billings from Bowles' Pictorial Drawing Room Companion from the 1850s. This one very interesting because it reflects the visions, the perspective of Americans about China, about the world. So you can see here on the Western Hemisphere, this is the United States. At that time, the war with Native Americans is still ongoing. But here, this is the one Indian is already at the footstep of Columbia. On the East Coast, on the East Hemisphere, old continents, European definitely in the center of the universe according to this Western view. Here, this is the China. Maybe I can zoom, you can see better. So according to the description, a Chinese man with straw hat and bamboo umbrella in the lower left corner symbolizes the so-called Far East. The editor comments, separation from the nearest point by 1,000 leagues of ocean, we are apt to look at it less as the integral portion of the common heritage of humanity than as another world. It is, in common parlance, the old world, another planet at its war. The distant land it that enchantment which belongs ever to the remote in space and time. So in the artist, in the editor's viewpoint, China is another planet. It doesn't even on this earth. So that's the middle of 19th century view when U.S. first began to interact with China and Chinese people. Here's another image. This is from by Victor Gelam. This is an illustration for the poem by Rudyard Kipling's White Man Burden, a very famous cartoon published in Judge, the April issue of Judge magazine, which present a turn-of-century imperialist attitude toward other cultures that is overly racist. So this image portrayed British jumbo lead Uncle Sam uphill from the depths of barbarism to the height of civilization, carry the so-called white man burden. Non-white nations that include Egypt, India, Sudan, Zulu, which is South Africa, and China for Britain, and the Philippines, Cuba, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Samoa for the United States. So one of the poem, you guys may want to take a look at this later on, White Man Burden. This one, they describe. You knew called a sullen people, half devil and half child. So that's the typical view around that time. Sino-US relationship during that time. So the top one on the right, this is the signing of Treaty of Tianjin, 1858. This is actually a drawing by a Chinese artist. And then William Ward was the first US ambassador ever stepped in Beijing. So this is the view of the meeting, the Ward mission to Beijing. Unfortunately, the artist was not allowed to join the ceremony. So he just based on other people's description, based on his own imagination. So the courtyard looked like Islamic, highly decorated courtyard. And those Chinese officials look like they are come from Roman Empire. The only thing you can see is this secretary taking note had a long quill. So give you that is happening in China. The last one on the lower left, that's also a very interesting picture. This one was when Qing dynasty, Qing court decided to abandon their complacent policy and send Anson Burlingame as a Chinese ambassador to tour United States. So this is 1868. So artists describe the China as ancient and civilized nation, worthy and entitled to full respect of the international community. In the Voice of America, Columbia holding the hands of Princess Gong. Brother and sister, I'm happy to present to you the oldest member of the family who desire our better acquaintance. Mr. Anson Burlingame sitting on the right. Some other key figures. I don't know if you can recognize the first person is Emperor Daoguang. He was in charge when the Opium War started. Then the second person is Hong Xiuquan. He was the leader of a Heavenly Peace Taiping rebellious movement. Ye Mingchen was Liangguang governor. And the last person, his name is Wang Qingfu. He's my hero. He's the first person ever used the term Chinese American, and I dedicated my book to honor him. War and unrest. So the first picture of fighting between Taiping rebels and the Qing government military force. The second picture is the bombardment of Guangzhou during the Opium War. The lower left is the fight at Daku fortress outside of Tianjin, where this is between British Navy and the British and French Navy, the Second Opium War. But the U.S. military lent a hand to rescue some of the sailors from British Navy. The last picture is depicting the Xinhai Revolution, the founding of the Republic of China. Some landscape scenes. The view of Beijing. And the second one is the Mr. William Ward, their first mission ever stepped the field inside Beijing. This is the front gate of Beijing. So they draw a large crowd of people observe the American mission to the United States. The lower right left is the Taihu landscape scene. So this is the last one is a bridge in Watertown in southern China, which is very typical. Because of the time limit, we want to get the program done in hours, so I will not get into each individual pictures. But this one is, sorry, I do want to mention the other one. This one on the lower left, that is the building of Qingdao port by Germans. So they have this portable kitchen, so that way they will keep the Chinese labor on site to keep them more efficient and more productive. This is also a very interesting picture. This is called a band-boat. This is after ocean cruise pull into harbor of Hong Kong. The locals will offer their fresh food, their sweet dessert to the foreigners. What is that makes this one stand out is that you see the position, the fully dressed Westerners and half naked the Chinese locals. So it makes it very stand out. And here's the Hong Kong colony. This is another picture that you can see. This is also the German sailor guarding prisoner during the earthwork in Qingdao. So this one presents another multiple contrast point. Front, back, high and low, clarity versus the fuzziness, and also rifles versus shackles. So this is a great illustrations. Here's the taking down dragon flag at Weihai Wei in Shandong. So you can see the arrogance of British tars, the sailors, versus the frustrations of the Chinese Qing officials. The last picture depicting by the artist is a stark contrast between the dilapidated Chinese junk boat in shadow and a modern Western ship sailing in dazzling sunlight. So just notice the perspective and the sharp contrast. God is the mercy. This is the faith and religion. God of the war, God of the farmer. Here, this is the God of the farmer, and then this is the Pangu Kaikendi. So created universe by Pangu, God of a son, God of a midwife. This is the God of a devil chaser, Zhong Kui, and the last one is God of literature. So any scholar want to have a great examination of their worship. So that's give you the idea of the faith religion in China. Entertainment, so acrobat, kite flying, one person entertainment show on the street. This is watching the Chinese opera, Chinese theater. Dragon Boat Festival, we just celebrated this past weekend. Horse racing in Hong Kong, and here's a picture of opium den, and this is the gambling stand. So you pick you pick out your bid, and he rotated the wheels. You win, you lose. So that's a straight corner in Fuzhou. Women. Here's a girl working in the tea plantations. Well-to-do women in China. There's two ladies wear silk and bubbling wheel road in Shanghai, which is now Nanjing Road. Here's a lady doing a delivery in Fuzhou. She looked like a Westerner, because that time they do not have a better grasp of a Chinese facial features. And this girl have a deep impression on an artist. So according to the artist, she carried a blossom in coil. She noticed us and came to water the edge, smiling and so sweetly. She was pretty enough to have upset the equilibrium of the great painter who ever lived. So the artists have a deep impression, because most of the people they met, they're all shy, they stayed away. But this girl approached them and smiled at the visiting Americans. So that is that left a deep impression. And then the champagne girl, the women driving the boat, according to the description, many of the girls are quite pretty, although their features are definitely Asian. All the readers united in their representing the conditions of women in China, both those of upper and the lower classes, as very degraded. The former are mere slaves, dolls and machines, and the later are hardly worked and harshly treated. So Dr. Huang is the expert on Chinese women. Maybe you can make a comment from a historical perspective compared with the current day's women's condition.
Well, thank you, Wenxian. I think those images are fascinating. So as we know and also reflected in this book, in the US, there has been a historical, visual, and rhetorical renditions of a certain population that works to dehumanize them and mean to delegitimate the political claims of immigrants, racialized groups, and the sexual minorities. For instance, the representation of the Chinese immigrant as rights, I think Wenxian is going to present later on. And we also know that the newly enfranchised ex-slaves was being painted as monkeys. And internationally, in the racialized global hierarchy, the Orient has always been constructed as exotic, erotic, barbaric, primitive, animalistic, and sometimes present as evil monsters. But in those kind of images, gender and sexuality played a very crucial role to construct the Orient as the capital other, and who are radically different from us. And we have known that Wenxian presented some of the example here. I think in the book, there are more that the Chinese very often, and the Chinese men, women, often being constructed in certain kind of stereotypes. For instance, the emasculated man, the feminized, excessively erotic, or inherently queer. And we see, for instance, the representation of emasculated Chinese men whose sexuality is either excessive or lacking, or Chinese women with bonded feet, and as concubines, prostitutes, controlled and confined by local patriarchy, and as victims of a barbaric culture. However, in this book, as the images Wenxian presented here, I also see images of Chinese women in various kinds of social roles, participating in social, intellectual, religious lives, and in social production. They were laboring women who operate in ferry, like the sampan girls, doing needlework, attending water buffalo, doing gardening, doing agricultural work such as plowing, harvesting rice, and sometimes with babies on their backs. They were nuns, and they are also gods. They many worshipped by women. They were well-educated women. Some of them, they read books like showing in here, and they appreciate poetry. I think they are another image showed. They were also on the street and participating in social life. There are spectaculars of Dragon Boat Festival, fireworks, and foreigners. And they came from both wealthy and poor families, some with banded feet, but some with natural and sometimes bare feet. I think the image on the right, lower right shows such a kind of image. I especially appreciate the comments Doolittle made on the image of large and natural fitted women at Fuzhou. And he said, bondage in the feet is simply a custom, but it is a custom of prodigious power and popularity. A custom as imperious as was the custom of tight lacing by ladies in some countries at the West, and perhaps not more ridiculous or unnatural, and much attractive of wealth and life. So I really appreciate that and also recognize and learn from this book. They are actually multiple dimensional representations of women of China. And I also appreciated the self-reflective comparison Doolittle made, which understood foot binding not as the weirdest thing those barbaric and strange people did over there, but as among the practices of distorting, controlling women's bodies that are shared by patriarchies in various locations. Thank you, Wenxian.
Thank you. Okay, so that will be a nice segue for the second part of my book, which is the U.S. The Chinese in America. So this is a very important episode in the United States history. This was published in June 1864 issue of Harper's Magazine. The actual event actually taking place in 1857 on the U.S. Cargo ship called Norway. This is written by Edgar Holden. He was a doctor on this cargo ship, which carried 1,038 coolie labor from Macau to Cuba. So this is a typical coolie trade. So the beginning, so the first picture is on board of the coolie to U.S. Norway, the cargo ship. Here's the three translators. They are mixed race, so Portuguese and Chinese. On the third day of the journey, in the middle of South China Sea, one person in the lower deck was beaten up. So he was rescued by the crew. So when he got up on the deck, he revealed a plot of the Chinese coolie they want to hijack because of the terrible conditions in the lower deck. They want to hijack the ship and take to Thailand. So he revealed, because he was beaten up, he has some kind of a disagreement. So he was beaten up, he let the crew know. So when the plot was revealed, the coolie decided to move up their rebellion. So the crew immediately sealed the cargo door to the lower deck. And this forced the people in the under the deck. They will try to set the boat on fire because all the air vent was sealed. So the fire was not successful. And then the crew member began shooting people in the lower deck. Eventually led to deaths of 70 people. And so 3 days later, people surrendered. So this mutiny failed. So this is the very heartbreaking event during the history of the coolie trade. It was called by the author a gigantic wrong. It's an outrage against human liberty, which eventually led to, finally in 1862, United States Congress passed an act to prohibit the coolie trade by American citizens in American vessels, which was signed into law by President Lincoln in 1862. So Chinese began to migrate to United States when the gold was discovered in California. So this is the gold rush, 1869. Chinese people, they work through their family, their hometown association. So they work as a team. So they normally work in the mines that are abandoned by other European workers. Because they work as a team, so they have this very efficient operation. So they were still able to discover gold. After the gold work is done, Chinese labor become the major force for the first cross-continental railroad. 90% or 10% of those workers are the Chinese. And all those, they came from southern China. They never experienced snow. So this is in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So many people died because of the severe storm, the freeze. But the owner, the management want to charge for because there's a prize to win. As you know, that at the last golden spike was nailed down, no Chinese was portrayed in that historical image. So after the railroad is done, Chinese were forced into the service industry. So this is a restaurant in Chinatown in San Francisco. Of course, also the Chinese make great contributions to the agricultural development in American West. So the railroad built led to a great population growth in American West, which resulted in a major recessions. So Chinese immigrants became the source of all evil, all the problem. So this was one of the largest anti-Chinese rally in 1876. Was first a protest by people in mass against Asian plague that threatened the ruins of California. Fears had been entertained for several months that animosity felt toward the Chinese might culminated into a riot or war of extermination. So this rally was attended by then California Governor William Irvin. And this image portrayed a Rock Spring massacre in Wyoming. Some scenes of Chinatown. So they celebrated Lunar New Year, Buddhist temple in Chinatown, the Chamber of Commerce in San Francisco, watching the Chinese drama in the Chinese theaters. Individual images, profiles of Chinese. You can see the first ones during the gold rush, Chinese miners, the face still look like somewhat like Westerners, but by the later years, the description is much more accurate. This is a very well-known back in the late 19th century. So this is a poem authored by Bret Harte. He was an American author and poet, best known for his short fictions feature miners, gamblers, and other romantic figures of California gold rush. This poem originally called Plain Language from the Truthful Gems. Hart have the Jewish family heritage. So here he portrayed a miners played the game with the Chinese. He tried to cheat, but he was outsmarted by the Chinese. But he tried to satire the anti-Chinese sentiment, but his message was too subtle. So the irony of the cheating of the Chinese man was no worse than the white man was lost among general readers. So the point shaped the popular American conception of the Chinese more than any other writings at that time, which made Hart the most popular literary figure in America in 1870s. Since his publication, Chinese in America was frequently labeled Haitian Chinese in the late 19th century, and this poem was often recited in public rallies against Chinese immigrants. Here's some other images. So the first one is a poster, a campaign poster against George Goran. He was a Republican candidate for governor in 1867. So you see on his shoulder, because he sympathized with African Americans, Chinese, and Native Americans. So he was portrayed here, and this is so awful. And so you see, there's a monkey here. It's such an overly racist portrait. The second image here, the title is The Last Addition to the Family, which implied the Chinese had become a newest member of American family. However, in sharp contrast to Columbia's gentle beauty, the dreadful face of the Chinese baby is very disturbing. The top one on the right, depicting with a very evil expression, the Chinese giant stand firmly on the American West Coast while looking down at a stunning fisherman, a mini Uncle Sam. This image demonizes the Chinese American, imply that his presence will be detrimental to the future of the United States, and it will be impossible to put the genie back into the bottle. Some of you may know this publication called the WASP. So WASP is a racist publication. It is so much hatred, so much the Chinese often, most of the artwork is done by Frederick Keller. He himself is an immigrant to the United States, first generation. So in his work, Chinese most often appear as swapping rats, vampires, fetish to the monopoly capital. So during the economic recessions in the 1870s and 80s, the WASP really served as the vanguard of anti-Chinese movement in California, and many of his illustrations represent the worst force of xenophobia, and often criticize a horrible example of deformation of Chinese immigrants in the United States. So Chinese was demonized as an investigation, as a subversive labor monster, as immoral, disease, and ruthless competitor. So this documentation of racial discrimination prevailing during the late 19th century really served as a very, very important reminder of this reprehensible cultural legacy in America. So if you want to know where the origin of Asian hate, that's where this comes from. So you all know that Statue of Liberty is a symbol of freedom and openness. But here, Chinese was portrayed as filthy immorality. His clothes look like a snake, and so the wreath of his from his head has few slogans such as disease, filthy, immorality, ruin to white labor. So this is another terrible example of a negative stereotype of a xenophobia in America in the late 19th century. And third image, you see the sharp contrast in terms of color and the portrayal. So this one is a lady in San Francisco being viciously attacked by horrendous blood-sucking Chinese vampire, which with a striking color contrast that this image strikes the immediate danger in American West, while openly provoking racial hatred toward the Chinese. And the top right image, this one, the title is called Chinese Many Hands and Soulless. So portrays the Chinese as a grim evil monster without a soul, with multiple hands engaged in all sorts of trade and vices, while struggling white workers in America. And this picture here ignores all the country, portrays Chinese as pest birds of farmland. It's really a great insult to all the Chinese immigrants who make a great contribution to the agricultural development in American West. And I have a lot more. I only select a few as representatives. Thomas West Nest is he was best known for portrayed creation of a political symbol of elephant as, for the Republican Party, and his artwork also popularized the symbols such as Uncle Sam, Columbia, and Democratic donkeys. He was called the father of American political cartoon, and also he was named the president maker because he has such a influential power in American election politics. He was a Lincoln Republican, very radical, very progressive views. He strongly condemned slavery and advocated civil rights and equality for all men. He not only opposed racial segregation, but also was one of the few artists who take up the cause of the Chinese in America. So in the years leading to the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, his artwork related to Chinese immigrants demonstrate a considerable political courage in the age of racial discrimination. So here's the passing of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which portrayed that his belief that the value of Lincoln's party is disregard and the core value of civil rights and tolerance for all people are abandoned by both parties. So the small tree of freedom for all has been violently ripped from the American Foundation for Liberty. The first picture here is also very interesting. You see how he divides good versus the evil. This vertical line as he makes his contrast. Here's he take up the cause of both the Chinese as well as the Native Americans, Chinese as well as African Americans. And here's some also very interesting images. This I probably cannot get into details, but I want to mention this one picture very struck me. So this one called Ultimate Cause, depicting an American missionary and his Chinese Christian followers. So the caption reads, "But why is it, ask a thoughtful Chinese, that I may go to your heaven, well, I may not go to your country?" The American missionary shrugged his shoulder. "There's no labor vote in heaven," said he. So I need to wrap up my presentation so that we'll leave time for question and answer. So my conclusion is that the cultural exchange and understanding between the United States and China is a very long and complex process. Chinese relationship with the United States had a far-reaching impact on the course of the country's modernization drive. Chinese immigrants were subject to racial persecutions, racial discriminations in the United States since they arrived on the coast, on the West Coast. But Chinese immigrants have contributed to the economic development and the cultural diversity of this country. And so they become Americans. So this is the cover image of Park magazine. This portrayed, we are going to celebrate 4th of July very soon. So this is the 4th of July edition in 1913. So this portrayed that China and the United States already joined together. It will be very difficult and dangerous to separate those two. And I would like to conclude my presentation with this quote from Confucius: "Study the past if you would like to divine the future." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang, so much. Wonderful presentation again, and it's a very, very unfortunate chapter in American history, but it's an incredibly important book. One of the things I couldn't help but notice is a pattern, not only in all the slides and cartoons you share, but also today. You know, there's one of the cartoons I remembered specifically was the depiction of, I think it was captioned, "The Chinese Wall of the United States of America," and it's depicting people climbing over the wall. I mean, that's a discourse we see happening even today. So one of the questions, I'll cede my time, I'll go first, but I encourage our audience, again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the Q&A portion. But the question I want to ask is, given your expertise and your experience with this compilation and writing this novel, how do you think that these images, cartoons have affected American policy? And how do you think that these images continue to affect society today?
Excellent question. Just a minor correction. Unfortunately, this is not fiction. So this work is nonfiction. So that's what really happened in the United States. So definitely, images is very powerful. So this, as you know, this old saying that one picture is better than 1,000 words. So images carry a lot of meaning, they carry a lot of powerful messages. So it can influence people. I mentioned that the illustration, the descriptions from the Harper's magazine on the coolie trade eventually led to the pass of the banning of the coolie trade by the American by the United States Congress. So definitely this impact United States politics as well as the Chinese politics as well. So the course of the Chinese interchange with American is shaped by politics, shaped by economics, by multiple factors. So images is one of those factors. So it's the descriptions, the missionary play a role. the military have a large role to play. So it is a very complex process. So I only provide one perspective from the visual documentation. So that's where I come from.
Thank you. Dr. Huang, what are your thoughts? I know that we saw a little bit about the depiction of Chinese women through some of these images. Do you think that that would affect current institutions of Orientalism and sexism we see in America today?
Yeah, I think in the book, you see that the picture of the bonded feet and how the bone has been deformed and so on. So there is so much about China, such a long history and a diverse life Chinese women have lived, but very often all the understanding and representation come narrowed down to certain negative stereotypes, which is very hard to fight against. And that's why I think this book, on the one hand, you know, teaching women's and gender studies, those images that convey sexism, racism, and colonialism, and those kind of xenophobic violence come as not a surprise to me, because we know that, and study that part of history help us to understand and to be informative about where those, as Professor Zhang said, where those stereotypes, where those biases coming from, and how we could address them. But what's refreshing in this book, and as I think Governor Holland early on mentioned, we also see hopes in some of those images. For instance, the image from the social life of Chinese in Harper's Monthly, and mostly by Doolittle, and those paintings by Theodore Wells on Chinatown. And those images actually present the Chinese people, the place, their social life, much more kind of objectively or sometimes sympathetically. And they kind of reflect a kind of genuine interest to different culture and the people, and show a sense of awareness and respect of one's co-inhabitants, and also a sense of being in the world differently but together. So I feel that this book is a good lesson for us to learn in the US and to be reminded, and use those kind of sense to guide our inquiries today. That is, how can we live with all beings differently but also together in this world?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And on the positive note, I'll turn to some of the questions we have in our Q&A. So love this question. So one of our attendees asked, in your gathering of primary sources, did you find illustrations by Chinese artists of Chinese scenes people in the United States attempted to counteract the racist sentiment towards the Chinese in America? So any positive images that you encountered, Professor Zhang?
Oh yes, quite a few. This is some positive images, and this mostly the artwork I select is done by Americans, because the book is China through American eyes. But there's few Chinese drawings that published in American media, publishing in American authored books. So I have few selected. So they portray the Chinese very positively. So in general, I think that as Harold Essak described, that the Americans, their view of China and the Chinese go through a four-phase period. So, you know, he was a Chinese scholar. He published the tragedy of the Chinese Revolution and the scratches of scratched on our mind American image of China and India. So according to his research, his study, he said that Americans' understanding of China goes through, this is in the 20th century, goes through the fourth period, benevolence, which is 1905 to 1937, and then admiration, this during World War II. After World War II, during the Chinese Civil War era, disenchantment. And then after when the Communist China, when the People's Republic of China was established after 1949, there is hospitality. So I feel that now we are probably going through another of this cycle. So after the Chinese reform, after Nixon opened up China, there's a strong interest, there's a strong, because China became a United States ally. So there's a mutual respect, admiration during the 80s. And then there's disenchantment. And right now it's all hostility, which is very, very unfortunate. So that's the reality we're dealing with nowadays.
Mm-hmm. That actually leads me to another question I wanted to ask. You covered 1949, Nixon's trip to China. Here we are now in 2021. How do you feel that your book and all these images can kind of help us understand the current tension we're seeing between the US and China? Do you think that there's any lessons to be offered through looking at historical perspectives like these?
Oh, yes. I think that's an excellent point. We need to learn what happened in the past. So in order to make sure what terrible thing happened will not happen again. So we need to know where we come from to have better sense of where we're going in the future. So I think that everybody, both sides, need to have a better understanding. Since China began to interact with the United States since the late 18th century, but the large-scale exchange taking place since the middle 19th century. So 1949, that's the new era. So People's Republic of China, the country has been blocked for decades until Nixon opened up China. I feel that what happened is very, very unfortunate. Despite the noise, despite all the dispute, I believe, it's my personal opinion, that Chinese people are good people, American people are good people. So we need to learn from each other, and the world will be a better place if Chinese and United States can work together instead of as the enemies. My book is focused on the historical part, so it's not my area of expertise on contemporary China, but this is my hope, my wish, that things will getting better with efforts like you guys are doing, like we are all doing our part to help bridge the culture and develop the relationship, develop the friendship for a better world for everybody.
Agreed. I love that Confucius quote you included right at the end. In order to divine the future, you must look at the past. I mean, I think that's perfect. I encourage all of our audience today, if you haven't yet, please check out Professor Zhang's book. And Professor Zhang, you should let our audience know where we can find it. But reading the book, it's very obvious to see patterns. I mean, the way that you've organized it historically, I think that reading the book, it's very obvious to see how important this is today, and it's very obvious to see these connections. So again, thank you again for a great talk today. I know we're almost out of time. Dr. Huang, any final comments or questions from you?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but I will just ask a simple one. I love the Sampan girl on the Pearl River image you used on your book cover. Could you tell us a little bit why you chose this image? And do you have a favorite image or images in this book if it is not the Sampan girl?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite images because it's the view of the artist and with background for this is in Guangzhou, Zhujiang Pearl River, and the girl is very pretty. So I like it very much, and also give that the historical perspective. So this is when the publisher asked me to recommend a image. So this one I come up immediately in mind. For the Chinese edition, the one that one I had no idea that Peking University would select that one. So that let me see if I can show you guys. Let me see if I can bring it up. By the way, if you can read Chinese, I recommend you to read the book in Chinese instead. This by Peking University Press. So this one, the images quality is much better. They're in color, so it's much pleasant to read. So if you want to read the books, I highly recommend this book. And it's much more affordable in Chinese. The English edition is available through Amazon. You can also order electronic books through World Scientific. They are a major Asian study publisher based in Singapore. I think that ebook version give you the options for you can zoom in, you can do a search. So also it's more affordable. So that's the two version of this same book. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoy share my learning experience with you guys. If any of you have a further questions, you can always contact me. My email just is wzheng@rollins.edu.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Huang and Professor Zhang for joining us today. It was a great talk. Professor Zhang, where can the audience find your book?
Just go to Amazon. You're going to find it. I think you can find both versions.
That's where I found it. All right. Well, thank you again, both of you, for joining us. This was a great conversation. Thank you to our audience. Again, if to our audience, if anyone has time, feel free to take our survey. But other than that, I'll close this discussion today. Thank you all so much again.
Thanks. Thank you.